I told my brother I wasn't coming to his wedding because his bride is my ex. He called me selfish, but what no one knew was that the day before the ceremony, she showed up at my door and confessed she still loves me. And now I'm standing outside the church, clutching a crumpled note in my pocket, while he waits for his I do at the altar. That was exactly 27 days ago when my mom called me. A call on a Wednesday evening, while I was trying to finish my cold dinner, always meant something. Awkward was coming. I answered, heard her voice, and instinctively knew I wouldn't have a peaceful night. Alex, you have to come this weekend. James and Sarah have set the date, and we need to discuss all the details. The wedding is in a month. Isn't that wonderful? She spoke with such a forced, fake cheerfulness, as if she was trying to convince herself more than me. I could feel her nervousness, and I knew why. James is my younger brother, and his fiancée, Sarah, was my girlfriend for 2 years. From the time we finished college until the moment I decided I needed to find myself in another state. That was 4 years ago. A stupid, selfish decision that cost me everything. And now, here's a blast from the past, in the form of a wedding invitation. I couldn't answer right away. A lump formed in my throat. I took a breath. Mom, I don't think I can make it. And then silence on the other end. Not just silence, but the kind that tingled with unstated accusation. After a second, she replied, but in a different voice, the one she always used when she felt her perfect family picture was about to crumble. What do you mean you can't? This is your only brother. Alex, you have to be there. This is family. What are these silly games you broke up years ago? There was no question in her words, only a harsh demand. And, of course, no mention that this wasn't just some girl. This was Sarah. My first real love, the one I planned a future with until I chickened out and ran away. The irony is that a year after I left, James, who was always my reflection, my quiet, stable opposite, started dating her. They grew close while I was busy finding myself. I found myself, sitting alone, with the realization that I had traded gold for dust. I tried to explain. I said I had a difficult project at work. I said flights were expensive. I even said I was sick. Mom countered every argument until I exploded. Mom, I just can't watch her marry him. You don't understand. I didn't finish. I couldn't say it. She shouldn't know. No one should. She interrupted me, her voice steel cold. This is your selfishness, Alex. You always think only of yourself. James needs your support. Family is more important than your childish grudges. She hung up, leaving me alone with a boiling cocktail of guilt, resentment, and a deep, aching yearning. Childish grudges? This grudge felt like a festering wound that I reopened every time I heard how happy they were together. The next day, James called me. He didn't yell. He spoke calmly, which was even worse. I know Mom called you. If you don't come, I'll understand, but just tell me honestly what's stopping you. Sarah, isn't it? His directness threw me off. I tried to make a joke, but he wouldn't let me. Alex, you've always been my hero, my older brother. I know what you two had, but it's over. Sarah and I have something else. If you can't be here for me, I'll accept it, but it will hurt me deeply. I need my brother. His voice was so sincere and vulnerable that I felt like the lowest scum. I couldn't tell him that I hate myself for leaving her, that I envy him every single day he spends with her. I just said, I can't, James. I'm truly sorry. This is my problem, not yours. I can't handle it. And I hung up, feeling like I lost this battle. I spent the next 2 weeks in self-imposed isolation, only answering work calls, ignoring my family. The texts from Mom were filled with passive aggression and accusations. James didn't text. I followed their life through social media, like a masochist. Photos of the wedding prep, a smiling Sarah, a glowing James. With every passing day, it became only more painful and more real. I convinced myself I did the right thing, that I protected myself, that they would be better off without me. But the truth was, I was just a coward. And then, last night, the day before their wedding, there was a knock at the door. 1 a.m. I was sure it was the neighbor who'd forgotten his keys again. I opened it and Sarah was standing on the threshold, in a light, black coat, with red eyes, and a suitcase at her feet. She just stood there and looked at me, and in her eyes was such unbearable pain that it stole my breath. Alex, I can't do it. I had to say this. I tried. I tried to forget you, I really did. James, he's a replacement. A good, reliable replacement. But I love you. Always have. Her words were like a punch to the gut. Everything I had felt for 4 years burst out. And now I'm standing outside the church, clutching the note she left after driving back to James at dawn, with the message, "Whatever happens, I'm waiting for your move, and I have to decide whether to destroy my brother's life to save mine." 31 days, that's all it took for my life to turn into hell. The smell of lilies and old lace was thick in the church, making me feel physically sick. I saw my mother's face in the third pew, a mask of forced composure. James looked like a movie star in his tux, but his eyes kept darting toward the back, where I was supposed to be sitting. He didn't know I was outside, or about the scene with Sarah last night. He definitely didn't know about the text she sent 10 minutes ago. He asked me if I'm happy. I couldn't look him in the eye. The shock of Sarah standing on my doorstep, out of nowhere, didn't wear off for hours. It was like the last 4 years, the carefully constructed wall of indifference and self-pity had instantly collapsed. She wasn't wearing a wedding dress, obviously, but she was wearing his ring, the diamonds sparkling under the harsh porch light, and it felt like a physical punch. I pulled her inside, not caring about the neighbors, only about the desperate, raw sound of her sobbing. Her breath smelled faintly of stale airplane air and something expensive, something floral that I used to buy her. The realization hit me. She hadn't just driven over from her parents' house. She had come from the other side of the country. She was supposed to be with James, probably at the rehearsal dinner, but she was here, in my apartment, telling me she still loved me. She kept repeating the same phrases, the words tumbling out in a rush of guilt and fear. "It's too late, I know, but I had to tell you. I thought I could do it. I thought stability was enough. James is good, Alex, he's so good to me. He's everything you weren't when you left. He's present." And that last word hung in the air, stinging. Present. She was right. I wasn't present back then. I was lost, afraid of commitment, convinced that chasing some vague, meaningless ambition was more important than the real thing standing right in front of me. I watched her wipe her eyes, her face swollen with crying, and I saw the real Sarah, the one who wasn't just James's calm, composed fiancée, but the broken woman who was about to make the biggest mistake of her life, and it was my fault. I didn't say much. Couldn't. What was I supposed to say? Great. I love you too. Let's trash my brother's life and run away? Felt like a line from a terrible, cheap drama. But the look in her eyes was real. She wasn't playing games. This was the moment of total surrender. She talked about how she tried to make it work with James, how she genuinely cared for him, but that every time he held her, she was picturing my face. She confessed that the wedding planning, the constant talking about their future, only highlighted the gaping hole I had left. James was a great distraction, a comforting reality, but he wasn't the chaos she craved, the deep, soul-wrenching connection we had. The worst part came when she mentioned James. She described him meticulously picking out her wedding shoes, trying to anticipate her every need. "He's too perfect, Alex," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He doesn't deserve this. He doesn't deserve to be second choice. And I can't look at him anymore without feeling like a liar." Her moral dilemma was mirroring my own, but hers was infinitely more immediate and terrifying. She wasn't just risking a broken heart. She was risking the whole stable foundation she had built after I tore hers down. She stayed for maybe an hour. We didn't kiss. We didn't touch, except for when I handed her a glass of water. The tension in the small apartment was so thick it was suffocating. Just before the sun started to lighten the sky, she stood up, grabbed her small suitcase, and looked at me with an expression I can only describe as pleading. "I have to go back. I have to see if I can do this, if I can be the person he needs. But if you think there's anything left, if you want to fight for this, you have one chance. Today." Then she scribbled something quickly on a scrap of paper from my desk, pressed it into my hand, that crumpled note I'm still holding, and walked out the door, back to my brother, back to her scheduled life. I spent the whole day today in a kind of fog. I reread that note. Whatever happens, I'm waiting for your move. At least 50 times. It wasn't a demand. It was a desperate lifeline. My phone was silent until about an hour ago. That's when I finally drove the 5 hours to the city, not even sure why I was going. My intention was just to watch from a distance, to confirm my worst fears and then drive home and finally put this ghost to rest. But as I pulled up near the church parking lot, I saw my mother's car. I saw the stream of guests going inside. I saw the limousine. It was all so agonizingly real. I was sitting in my car, heart pounding, when her text came through. He asked me if I'm happy. I couldn't look him in the eye. That single sentence told me everything I needed to know. She was at the breaking point. She was standing on that altar, in that dress, next to my brother, and she was miserable. And I, the coward who left her, the brother who promised he wouldn't come, was suddenly the only person who could stop the train wreck. I could ruin my brother, devastate my mother, and maybe, just maybe, save the one good thing I ever threw away. The internal clock was ticking down, and I knew I couldn't just sit in the car. I had to get closer, had to see her face one last time. I had to know if the pain I saw last night was just panic or the truth. The organ music started. A booming, majestic sound that sealed my decision. I needed to see. I had to. I got out of the car, adjusting my clothes, feeling the crumpled note burn a hole in my pocket. I moved toward the church doors, not knowing if I was going to be a spectator or a saboteur. But one thing was clear. This wasn't about James's happiness anymore. This was about 3 lives about to shatter, and only I held the hammer. I slipped through the back door of the church just as they started the first hymn. I wasn't supposed to be here, and the atmosphere felt toxic, like I was breathing in everyone's strained expectations. My mother caught my eye immediately. Her face went from tense anticipation to pure, undisguised horror. Sarah was radiant, but the smile was thin, almost painted on. And when she turned her head just slightly, her eyes found mine in the shadow of the back pew. In that moment, the entire service stopped for me. Her gaze wasn't on James. It was on the man she told was her replacement. I managed to slide into a back pew, the hardwood digging into my spine, feeling like a thief or a spy. The air was heavy, not just with flowers, but with the combined, palpable joy and denial of everyone present. My family was clustered near the front, a perfect, oblivious picture of domestic bliss, and I, the prodigal screw-up, was watching them from the perimeter, ready to detonate the whole scene. Mom's eyes, though, they were the problem. She gave me a single-minute shake of her head, a silent, furious warning. Don't you dare. I ignored it. I was past the point of caring about her approval or her idealized family image. The ceremony proceeded with agonizing slowness. Every word the priest said about commitment and forever felt like a direct, personal jab at my past mistakes. I kept my head down, pretending to study the old wooden floor, but my peripheral vision was locked on the front. James looked genuinely happy, perhaps the happiest I'd ever seen him. He was stable, successful, the guy who always did the right thing, the guy who deserved this kind of uncomplicated happiness. The realization of what I was potentially about to destroy was crushing me. He trusted me, he looked up to me, and I was here, holding a secret that could permanently cripple him. Then, the organ music swelled, signaling Sarah's entrance down the aisle. The entire congregation stood, and I couldn't keep my eyes down any longer. She moved with an ethereal grace in the elaborate white dress, and for a second, I forgot everything. The note, the conflict, the brothers standing at the altar. She looked exactly like the woman I was supposed to marry, the life I was supposed to have. It hit me with the force of a physical blow. The stupidity of my younger self, the sheer, arrogant waste of a perfect future. As she reached the altar, she was positioned perfectly in my line of sight. When she finally looked up, after placing her hand in James's, her eyes scanned the crowd, briefly connecting with my mother, then finally landing on me. It was only a split second, maybe two, but it was enough. There was no joy, no panic, just a deep, quiet plea. It was the look of a drowning person looking at the shore. She saw me, she acknowledged my presence, and I knew, without a doubt, that she was counting on me to make a move. The emotional temperature in my chest spiked. It was no longer just about my feelings. She had pulled me onto the stage. Then came the conflict. The priest began his sermon, a long, rambling speech about the sanctity of marriage. James shifted his weight, and as he did, he turned slightly, and his eyes found mine. Unlike Mom's silent fury, James's expression was one of pained confusion and relief. "You came." That's what his eyes said. "You actually came. Thank you." His face brightened slightly, a genuine, trusting smile stretching his features, and he nodded almost imperceptibly. That look, that brotherly affirmation, was the hardest thing I had faced all month. It was the purest form of guilt injected directly into my conscience. He wasn't seeing a threat. He was seeing his big brother finally supporting him. I felt a fierce, burning heat rise in my throat. I wanted to stand up, to shout, "I'm sorry, I can't," and walk out. But I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the floor. The image of Sarah's pleading eyes wrestled with the image of James's trusting smile. This was the classic moral dilemma I always read about, only it was happening to me right now with real consequences. If I stayed quiet, I protected my brother's heart but doomed Sarah and myself to a lifetime of regret and lies. If I spoke up, I got the woman I loved back, but I destroyed James's life, his reputation, and permanently broke my family. The tension was an electrical current running through the whole room, and I was the grounding wire. The priest was winding down. The promises were coming. James was speaking his vows, clear, strong, and full of conviction. When it was Sarah's turn, her voice was almost a whisper, barely carrying over the microphone. She was looking at James, but her eyes were empty, distant. They were the eyes of someone going through the motions. She was fulfilling her commitment to James, but she had already made a more desperate commitment to me last night. As the priest moved on, I heard the subtle rustle of programs and the shifting of feet. The air became thinner. The climax was approaching. I felt the sweat prickling my hairline. I reached into my pocket and touched the crumpled note, her desperation fueling my own. She had done her part by showing up here. Now she was waiting for me to do mine. I was moments away from either being a loving, if somewhat late, brother, or the ruthless catalyst for a dramatic tragedy. I had to decide if my own happiness, and Sarah's, was worth the inevitable catastrophic fallout. The conflict was so intense, I could barely breathe. The priest paused, clearing his throat, raising his voice for the final, dreaded question. I could feel the entire room leaning forward, bracing for the inevitable, final words. My breathing had become shallow, a tight, ragged sound in the dead silence of the church. I was preparing to stand up to finally make my move, the one Sarah was waiting for. I even pushed my hands off the pew and leaned slightly forward, ready to shatter the illusion. But then, James did something completely unexpected. As the priest opened his mouth to ask the definitive question, my brother turned from the altar, scanning the faces in the congregation one last time, and his eyes locked onto mine. And he smiled, not the trusting, relieved smile from before, but a slow, knowing grin that made my blood run cold. The priest had begun the phrase, the dreaded, famous line that stops every wedding movie. If anyone here present knows of any reason why this couple should not be joined in holy. He paused, taking the mandatory dramatic breath, giving me the window. My muscles were coiled. I saw the flash of movement from my mother in the third row, her hand flying to her mouth, probably anticipating my disaster. I saw Sarah's head tilt slightly towards me, her eyes wider now, awaiting the explosion. This was the moment. The note in my pocket felt like a hot piece of metal. I was ready to ruin everything for the chance to put my life back together. But that smile from James stopped me mid-motion. It was the smile of a cunning fox, not the innocent, oblivious little brother I thought I knew. It wasn't relief. It was a calculated, ominous signal. It was a smile that said, "I see you, and I know." The thought struck me like a lightning bolt. He knows. He knew she went to see me. But how? Sarah had sworn she told no one. She had left my apartment before dawn. James was supposed to be the perfect, unsuspecting groom, blissfully unaware that his fiancée had spent the night before their wedding confessing her love to his older brother. The whole narrative I had constructed, my moral agony, my perceived power to stop the wedding, suddenly felt fragile and false. I didn't sit down, but I didn't stand up either. I was frozen in a half-crouch like a sprinter waiting for a starting gun that had already misfired. The priest, noticing the brief interruption in the atmosphere, started to repeat the question, his voice firmer this time. But I wasn't listening to him. I was watching James. My brother's eyes never left mine. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't encouragement. It was a challenge. It was him saying, "Go on. Do it. Say the words. See what happens." The sheer arrogance, the sudden shift in his demeanor, was breathtaking. He was not the victim here. He was playing the long game. I suddenly flashed back over the last few weeks. James's strange calm on the phone. His direct question, "It's Sarah, isn't it?" Which I'd interpreted as sensitive understanding. Now, it sounded like an interrogation. And my mother's almost instantaneous hang-up when I had tried to confess. Maybe she hadn't been trying to protect herself. Maybe she was trying to protect James's plan. The thought was insane, but it explained the sudden, terrifying competence in my brother's gaze. The quiet, reliable brother was not who I thought he was. He wasn't just a replacement, he was a strategist. He had taken the woman I threw away and was now, in front of God and everyone, daring me to interfere. The moral dilemma shifted violently. It was no longer about saving Sarah from a lie. It was about exposing James's possible manipulation. Was he using Sarah's history with me to secure his victory? Did he know about her lingering feelings and was intentionally pushing this marriage to publicly and permanently secure her, and prove once and for all that he was the better man, the one who stayed? The possibility was vile and compelling. I looked from James's challenging smirk to Sarah, who was still only looking at me. She was oblivious to the silent confrontation happening inches away from her. She only saw the man who had promised her hope the night before. She was waiting for me, the hero, to interrupt the ceremony. If I spoke now, I would interrupt the wedding, but I would also be giving James exactly what he seemed to want. A massive public family scandal that would irrevocably break his relationship with Sarah, regardless of who she chose. He would be the martyr, the heartbroken groom, and I would be the villain who couldn't let his brother be happy. And what if she still chose him? What if her confession was just pre-wedding panic? The priest had finished the question, and the silence that followed was deafening. It stretched, heavy and profound, the longest silence in my entire life. Everyone was looking at the couple, but my eyes were locked on James's face. He tilted his head slightly, a silent prompt. "Well, Alex, your move." I realized in that agonizing pause that my brother had already won the moment I walked into the church. By showing up, I had validated his entire game. Now, the only way to beat him wasn't to speak, but to. My mind was racing, trying to find the one move that would dismantle his perceived power. But before I could process another thought, the decision was taken out of my hands. A woman in the fourth row, a distant cousin I barely knew, coughed. A loud, clearing the throat sound that snapped the tension. James looked back at the priest, his smirk disappearing, replaced by his perfect groom expression. The opportunity window was gone. The priest was turning to James for the final, official affirmation. The realization was gut-wrenching. I had missed my shot, paralyzed by a brother's calculated audacity. The moment the cousin coughed, I knew I had failed. The perfect, cinematic moment to declare my love and stop the wedding was gone, stolen by a strategic smirk and a woman's dry throat. James turned back to the priest, the brief, knowing tension between us dissolving into the church's formal air. I slumped back into the pew, the weight of my cowardice a crushing physical burden. I hadn't just protected my brother. I had sacrificed myself and Sarah to his silent, calculated victory. The wedding continued, suddenly moving with a brutal, relentless speed. James spoke his final, unwavering "I do." It was loud, clear, and utterly final. It echoed through the church, sealing the contract and, more importantly, cementing his dominance in this ugly, hidden war. He didn't look back at me. He didn't have to. He had posed the question, waited for my failure, and moved on. I felt a surge of cold, pure hatred for him, a feeling far more intense than any sibling rivalry I'd ever experienced. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a takeover. The priest moved to Sarah. "And do you, Sarah, take this man, James, to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Her name hung in the air, a silent question aimed as much at me as at her. This was her last chance, too, the final moment before the irreversible. She took a deep, visible breath. Her eyes were fixed on James, but her expression was unreadable. A blank slate that betrayed none of the desperate vulnerability I'd seen on my doorstep hours ago. It was a mask of resignation, expertly crafted. She was shutting down the feeling, preparing to live the lie. Then she spoke. Her voice was quiet, thinner than James's, but perfectly audible over the microphone. I do." The sound of those two words, "I do," hit me harder than any public rejection could have. It wasn't just the answer to the priest. It was the answer to my question. It was the rejection of the life she offered me last night. In the end, faced with the choice between the unstable passion of our past and the predictable comfort of James, she had chosen stability. She had chosen the man who stayed, the man who was present. I had forced her into a position where the easiest escape route was to continue down the aisle, and she had taken it. The relief in the church was instantaneous and collective. My mother let out a small, almost inaudible sigh, her shoulders relaxing. The priest smiled. James, however, did something that only I noticed. As Sarah finished the phrase, he didn't look at her. He looked straight at me again, his eyes briefly twinkling with something that could only be described as triumph. It was a look that said, "You lose. She's mine now." And then, the moment of the kiss. James turned to his bride, lifted her veil, and kissed her. It was a long, public, possessive kiss. It was his final, nonverbal declaration that the old chapter was not just closed, but annihilated. I watched them, the reality of the situation sinking into my core. I had come here to save the woman I loved, only to witness her choosing to be saved by the safety of my brother, leaving me with the knowledge that I was the catalyst for the entire scenario. As the congregation burst into applause, I stood up, feeling a profound, chilling emptiness. My legs were unsteady. I couldn't stay for the formalities, the signing, the walk down the aisle. I couldn't watch them celebrate the foundation of a life built on a double lie. Sarah's lie to James, and James's potential lie to Sarah and me, about how much he knew. I started walking toward the back door, hunched over, trying to become invisible. Just as I reached the exit, someone grabbed my arm. It was Mom. Her voice was low and harsh, laced with adrenaline and residual fury. "You came late, you scared me half to death, and you stood there like a stone. What was that? You almost ruined everything, Alex. Everything. Just for your ego." She was shaking my arm. I looked at her, and for the first time, I saw her not as my loving mother, but as a crucial participant in the family facade. "He knew, Mom," I whispered, the words rasping in my throat. James knew she still had feelings for me. He knew she came to my place last night. He was waiting for me to speak. Mom's expression didn't change to surprise or horror. Instead, it became harder. "And what if he did, Alex? He secured his future. He made his move when you were too much of a coward to make yours 4 years ago. He is reliable. He is here. And now she is his. That's the difference between you and him. Now go. And don't ruin the reception." She let go of my arm and walked back toward the front, smoothing her dress, her loyalty to the new family unit complete and absolute. I walked out the back door and into the bright sunlight, which felt blinding after the gloom of the church. I got into my car and just sat there, clutching the crumpled note from Sarah. "Whatever happens, I'm waiting for your move." She was waiting for the brave man I used to be, the man who would tear down walls for her. I was waiting for the woman who would risk everything for passion. We both waited for ghosts, and in the end, we both settled for the silence. I drove away from the church, away from the laughter and the confetti, leaving the happy couple and my shattered family behind. The story wasn't just about a wedding that almost stopped. It was about the irrevocable price of inaction. I realized that James hadn't just won Sarah. He had won the narrative. He was the hero. I was the jealous, late brother. The ultimate, bitter truth was that my initial selfishness 4 years ago had created this perfect opportunity for my brother, and my latest moment of hesitation, born of guilt and confusion, had permanently sealed my fate. The whole thing, the intense emotional high, the desperate confession, the public confrontation, had played out over 31 days. And in the end, nothing had changed, yet everything was destroyed. I was alone, exactly where I started, only now I had absolute proof of what I had lost, and the haunting philosophical question. Does stability, even if built on a tremor of doubt, always win against the possibility of volatile, real love? I was driving toward an empty apartment, and I knew I would be asking myself that question for the rest of my life.